have to face it. The Chinese economy is beating the living daylights out of the U.S. economy. Whether you want to call it a rout, a defeat, or a massacre, the reality is that China is completely embarrassing America on the global economic stage. While the Eastern superpower continues to report extraordinary growth, even amid a global slowdown, things in the U.S. have already gone from bad to ugly. And now they're starting to go from ugly to catastrophic. It almost feels like the Chinese are playing economic chess while the Americans are playing economic checkers. China is now set to overcome the United States and become the largest economy in the world by the end of this decade. Economists forecast that the Chinese economy can actually become 3 times larger than the U.S. economy by mid-century. That's a clear sign that the era of U.S. economic supremacy is coming to an end, and it seems like most Americans don't even know this is happening. It all started when numerous corporations in America realized they could make a lot more money if they shipped their production overseas. When that shift happened, the U.S. had such a strong and dominant position that it didn't really matter who was in second place. At the same time, when we started importing loads of products that were made in China, the American people were thrilled by the fact that prices were lower and they could buy more goods than they used to. Businesses loved it because profit margins increased, and foreign nations also benefited because we were helping them develop their economies and get richer. At that time, everyone was making money and everyone was happy. But then, the trickle of jobs and factories leaving the country started to become a massive flood. Then it became an overwhelming deluge. The number of middle-class jobs in the U.S. started to drop by the thousands. Suddenly, Americans started to notice that the vast majority of jobs available were low-paying jobs. Even though the prices of the goods in the stores were still low, the average American family was getting increasingly squeezed, so they were forced to take on more and more debt in order to maintain the same standard of living. That has kept fueling the growth of the consumer debt bubble over the years. Simultaneously, as more and more businesses and jobs fled the country, the U.S. tax base just wasn't as reliable as it was before either. The federal government, state governments, and local governments all started borrowing monumental amounts of cash from the very countries we were sending all of our money to. That's when China started to emerge as an economic superpower. After joining the World Trade Organization, it really started to fill our ports with cheap products. By having a workforce of hundreds of millions of people that earn about $1 an hour, China could easily crush any other Western competitor. Back then, most people didn't care where these products were being made. They just kept running out to the retail giants and filling up their carts and paying for everything with borrowed money. But eventually, all of that debt had to be paid. And that's when things started falling apart. In other words, the American dream was purchased with borrowed money. And that's why now we're up to our necks with consumer and government debt after sending unprecedented amounts of wealth over to China while they send us massive piles of cheaply made products. This was supposed to be a good deal for both sides, but in the end, it turns out it was a pretty great deal for them and a terrible deal for us. For that reason, in today's list, we're going to expose the true proportions of the mess the world's wealthiest country has fallen into. But before moving on, please support our work with a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Without further ado, here are 20 facts that prove the Chinese economy is beating the living daylights out of the U.S. 1. Statistics compiled by Stanford University economics professor Ed Lesier highlighted that if the U.S. economy and the Chinese economy continue to grow at current rates, the average Chinese citizen will be wealthier than the average American citizen in approximately 15 years. Considering that annual wage growth in America is averaging a mere 1.6% when adjusted to inflation, while Chinese wages have been growing at a 16% rate in the past 5 years, that shift can occur even faster than expected. We are talking about a very different world if we don't get our growth rates back up with the kinds of policies that are aimed toward long-term growth rather than the policies that fix things for the next 6 months, said Lazier, referring to the U.S. current monetary policies. So, already the disparities between the financial condition of U.S. and Chinese households are absolutely staggering. In America, the average household debt load is 136% of the average household income, whereas in China, it's only 17% of the average household income. 3. Last year, at least 24.4% of all goods we bought at our local stores came from China. Meanwhile, only about 19.4% of the products we consumed were actually made in America. 4. Since 2020, the U.S. has spent over $1.3 trillion on Chinese products, but China has only spent $316 billion on American products. 5. In 2021 alone, the U.S. imported $506 billion in goods and services from China, while the Chinese only imported $151 billion worth of American goods and services. 6. The U.S. trade deficit with China is almost 10 times larger than it was in 1990, skyrocketing from $39 billion in 1991 to $355 billion last year. 7. In July 2020, the U.S. trade deficit with China was already standing at $79.6 billion. Back in 1985, it was $6 million for the entire year. If that doesn't highlight our growing dependency on Chinese exports, nothing else does. 8. Zero Hedge analysts revealed in a 2019 expose that over 46,000 factories have been transferred from the U.S. to Asia since China joined the World Trade Organization. 9. From that point on, Americans have lost on average 50,000 manufacturing jobs a year as more and more companies ship these positions to Chinese markets. 10. In 1998, the U.S. had 25% of the world's high-tech export market, and China had nearly 10%. But in 2020, the U.S. share had fallen to 19.48%, while China's share increased to 31.28%. 11. In a span of only 7 years, approximately 2.4 million U.S. tech jobs were lost due to the massive growth of the Chinese tech industry, according to a study released by the Economic Policy Institute. But the impact of those losses was not restricted to layoffs and displacement. Competition with low-wage workers from less developed countries has also driven down wages for tech workers in manufacturing and reduced the wages and purchasing power of similar workers throughout the economy. The ripple effect of this shift has affected essentially all production workers and roughly 70% of the tech private sector workforce, impacting around 100 million workers in the U.S., researchers noted. 12. Moreover, since the turn of the century, America's share of global GDP has been steadily dropping, while China's share has been consistently climbing. Today, the United States accounts for only 15.74% of global GDP, while China accounts for 18.62%. 13. For over a century, the United States was the leading consumer of energy in the whole world. But that changed in 2010, when China not only took the spot, but became the country with the largest shale natural gas reserves in the globe. 14. According to the Center for Economics and Business Research, China is set to become the indisputably largest global economy by 2030, overtaking the United States in less than 8 years. Beijing has the funds and the unfettered domestic political power to use China's large public treasury to make strategic investments in the service of the leadership's national and global objectives, highlighted Denny Roy, the senior fellow at the East-West Center. In other words, the era of American supremacy is almost up. 15. China is already number one in many categories. It has the world's fastest train, the world's largest high-speed rail network. It is the number one producer of wind and solar power. It is the world's largest consumer of just about every major commodity, purchasing 53% of the world's iron ore, 47% of the world's coal, 44% of the world's lead, 41% of the world's zinc, 40% of aluminum, 39% of copper, 36% of nickel, and also consuming 60% of the world's cement. However, it's also the biggest producer of cement. In fact, in the past 2 years, China has produced more cement than the US did for the entire 20th century. 16. Research conducted by the Peterson Institute for International Economics found that the Chinese economy already has the same amount of purchasing power as the U.S. economy. In fact, by analyzing data from the World Bank, researchers estimate that China has 1.18 times of the U.S. purchasing power on a parity basis. That's slightly higher than us. 17. In about 3 years, China will have built enough skyscrapers to fill 10 New York-sized cities, Business Insider reports. By 2025, 40 billion square meters of floor space will be built in 5 million buildings. 50,000 of these buildings could be skyscrapers, the equivalent of 10 New York cities. 18. This year, China has officially overtaken the United States in scientific research output and high-impact studies, according to a report published by Japan's Science and Technology Ministry. The report found that Chinese research comprised 27.2% of the world's top 1% of most frequently cited papers, while the U.S. only accounted for 24.9%. It also highlighted that China has the largest number of researchers in the corporate and university sectors among major countries and is one of the top countries in the world in terms of both the quantity and quality of scientific papers. Shinichi Kuroki of the Japan Science and Technology Agency explained. On top of that, in 2019, China became the global leader in patent filings, dethroning the U.S., which was holding the number one position ever since 1978. In order to regain its position as the true global leader, the U.S. will have to invest and produce a significantly larger number of internationally recognized research projects over the next few years. 19. After 2 years of strict health policies and travel restrictions, the Chinese economy is facing a slowdown, but that's the first year of slower expansion since 1976. While the U.S. has seen 4 major economic downturns since then, and even though the U.S. projected GDP for 2022 is 0.8% higher than the projected GDP of China, over the past 10 years, the Chinese economy has grown 316%, while the U.S. economy has only grown 43%, which means that the Eastern superpower has been growing 7 times faster than us for a decade, Bloomberg data shows. And 20. At the end of August 2022, China accumulated $3.48 trillion in foreign currency reserves. That is by far the largest money stockpile on the entire globe. How did they get all that money, you may ask? The answer is simple. They got it from us. We basically handed trillions of dollars to the Chinese instead of giving to our own businesses and workers. That's why our economy is now falling apart. Over half of the nation is struggling financially, and people cannot find decent jobs. The greatest economy on the entire planet has been literally ripped to shreds. We have to admit that sacrificing our jobs and our entire economic infrastructure in the name of cheap products and debt-fueled consumption was not worth it at all. The decline of the U.S. economy is a slow-motion disaster that's been years in the making. And it's clear that our leaders don't have any strategy to turn things around at all. So while the collapse of our empire accelerates, the Chinese will continue to crush us on the global economic stage while they laugh all the way to the bank. What do you think? We look forward to reading your comments below. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with friends and family.